Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to the third installment of my Oscars death race, where I'm trying to watch every single nominee for this year's Oscars. Everything from the major feature films all the way down to the itty bitty shorts. I'm going to be watching all of them, and this is the third installment, meaning we are getting closer and closer to the finish line. We've already actually checked off a lot of films that'll be brought up in these categories: Amelia Perez and I'm Still Here and The Wild Robot. But we are looking at the rest of the international films today, the rest of the animated films, and of course, all five of the documentary feature films. And then we're almost there. Then we all have the shorts, and then we're done, and then we're caught up. I mean, this was such a fun death race. I'm getting closer and closer to the finish line, and this video kind of marks the 75 percentile finish point. So thank you for joining me along the ride so far. If you missed the last two videos, I'll link one of them up there above, and then you can find the other one by looking at that one, which has the other video linked in it above. Either way, thank you for joining me along this ride. Let's start off with the documentaries, because I feel like this year the documentary category let me down. Not that these documentaries are bad, not that the issues themselves aren't important and worthy about talking about, but I do think, this is a year where I was so passionate, not just for one documentary. Every year I have a documentary that I'm passionate about that doesn't get chosen, but this year I was passionate about two documentaries in particular. The documentary Daughters, about these prison inmates who basically get a pass to spend a father-daughter dance for one night only with their daughters that they haven't seen for some people months, for some people years, and then they wouldn't see years afterward until they got out of prison, or if they're serving life sentences, they wouldn't see regularly at all. And it really kind of dives into the prison system and these estranged relationships, but also the want and the need to do better, and to try to get better and learn from your mistakes so you can get back to the people you love, and also looking at the daughter's perspective as well and what their lives are like without their fathers. I thought that was so powerful. And then another one, The Remarkable Life of Evelyn, which is about this kid who, after he passes away, his parents go deep into the archives of his interactivity on the internet with these different communities, these different groups that he was a part of, and they find out that he had this basically secret life on the internet. But it ends up being that this is not a secret life. The secret life is actually what is going on in the real world with him and his parents, because that's where the communication is lacking. But the real world that Evelyn, this kid, experienced was in this World of Warcraft universe with these people that he considered real friends and family, real relationships, real romances. And I thought this was just such a powerful documentary to show that, like, online relationships can be valid, and that we can find ourselves in the media we consume and the things we love and the art we create and the art we experience and share with one another. And it is a very sad documentary, obviously, because these parents are finding out all these things about their son they didn't know until after his death. But it's also very uplifting in the fact that it can show how one person, even if you don't necessarily see on the outside all the influence they are bringing to a person's life, just through conversations through other people, you can see how they were able to be touched individually in their hearts by this person, this one individual, Evelyn. And I just cried my eyes out for both those documentaries. So for both of them to not make it in, and I know I spent time talking about them, but I don't care because I love those documentaries so much. For them to not make it in, and then to see some other high-profile documentaries, I mean, Will and Harper, another one that is so progressive, especially with its trans themes, in a year where I saw the TV Glow didn't get anything, the People's Joker didn't get everything, and the film that got a lot of things, that 13 nominations, is one that is not widely accepted in the trans community as a very good representation of trans issues. So I really did want to see Will and Harper get in there too. So that's three documentaries that I'm really passionate about that didn't make it into the crop of five, which makes it a little harder to assess this crop of five. There's one that I really, really like that I nominated for the Pickle Awards that I stand by, but the other four I think are good and all have different unique aspects about them that I understand why they got nominated. Also, the issues themselves are very important. But I think in terms of the actual filmmaking and the structure and the way they're presented, I just think those three documentaries that I mentioned, Daughters, The Remarkable Life of Evelyn, and Will and Harper, it's just weird to see a world where those three, at least one of them, isn't in your best five documentaries of the year. But I think that also goes to show that it was a great year for documentaries. So I think that's a plus. The fact that there was a hard choice, that there were tough cuts. Sometimes I just don't care enough about any of them, where I'm like, all right, I didn't really care what made it, didn't really care what missed. Here, I'm like, you know what? The five that made it, I understand. One I really, really like. One I really appreciate. A few others I really like the actual topics and the issues they're bringing forth. One I really didn't care for, but let's get into them because this is what you guys came here to see, was we talk about the 5 that actually did get nominated. And we're going to start with Black Box Diaries. This follows a woman in Japan, Shiori Ito, who documents her sexual assault investigation and case in Japan. This is one of those examples where I think the actual subject matter and the subject of the documentary, her story and her power and her resilience and her quest and her mission is so admirable, and something that I love and something that I want to root for and really invested in, and is really inspiring. But then you look at the actual filmmaking, and it's very standard in terms of its actual conventional structure and filmmaking. I mean, she is documenting her own case, so it's not necessarily a documentarian kind of putting on this film. It's her kind of documenting her own journey, and through that, you're not getting all the innovative direction and editing you would otherwise normally get with a documentary. And I think this is one that is solely based on its issue, but its issue is so important. I mean, to think of all these issues, I wouldn't necessarily say this is the most important, because I don't think you should be comparing this to the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine as like equal footing necessarily. But I do think this is something that for women, and for women, especially in Japan, internationally, we think of this as a very big issue in the US, but sometimes we forget that like the Me Too movement wasn't just a localized national thing, but it became an international thing, and that the Me Too movement could carry its way through other countries. And in fact, it's actually harder in some other countries to really break through, because in this documentary, you see how it's actually tied to the government. There is a real powerful government official whose close friend is the one who is the perpetrator in this sense. And I think that is really fascinating. It shows that the fight is still being had in other places, and that you are not alone. If you think you're alone in your own country, there are so many other countries where this is a very big struggle. This is a hard fought battle everywhere you go. So I think for the issue, this is obviously one of the most impactful documentaries you can see. It's just the actual presentation of it didn't offer anything particularly new to where I was like, wow, I'm blown away by that documentary. I'm blown away by her story. And actually, a lot of this film documents how she's trying to get her book published and received and sold and bought by other people. And I think, honestly, I would love to read the book and see if the book dives even deeper, because I think that can be really where you get that real firsthand point of view. Whereas this one is very much about the facts, about the court case, about the evidence. And, I think the emotion is something that you could probably dive even deeper into if you read the book, or if this were able to expand and continue along. Because that's the thing, documentaries have to end. And a lot of the times their stories live past the end of the documentary itself, which we'll talk about with our next one, which is No Other Land, which is another one that's nominated for Best Documentary Feature. This is the one where, like, I wanted this one in. This one got in. I'm happy it got in. I nominated at the Pickle Awards. This is also the one I think is the biggest critical darling of the batch. I think it could be a little controversial for audiences, obviously, because it's dealing with the war in Gaza, the war with Palestine and Israel. But I think this offers a very blatant, objective look at things. Whether or not you side with one side or the other, I mean, that's a political conversation that is very hard to dive into. And a lot of people have their different opinions, and there are rights and wrongs all around. But I think this is just showing the innocent people who are affected that have really no say. They have no impact. All they have to do is just kind of sit and watch their worlds kind of crumble before them. It's kids and it's their schools. There's quite literally a sequence where their school gets like bulldozed down. And that's somewhere where, like, regardless of what side you're on, you watch that and you're like, that can't be subjective. You see that and you're like, that is a school being torn down, and these kids now have nowhere to learn. Some people have nowhere to live. These are their livelihoods kind of being ripped to shreds. And I think it does offer a real great deal of empathy, especially for the people on the other side that are all seeing it from one side. They see this documentary and they realize that there are so many innocent people affected. And it does have that conversation with both sides, because there are also main figures in this documentary that sit down and talk with one another who are from opposing sides. Some are Israeli, some are Palestinian, and you kind of see that conversation happen, which is something that a lot of documentaries wouldn't have. A lot of them would be solely one-sided. And here I feel like at least you get that other perspective of someone who lives in another place but may have opposing issues and may have problems with what their side is doing. And you have those conversations that really are what is important in these times. It is something, an issue that is hard to talk about, because there are so many things we don't know, but there are also so many things we do. And this is kind of showing us the very blatant, objective look at what is going on in the destruction of these neighborhoods and these people that are seeing everything torn down. And what I brought up with Black Box Diaries about the fact that Documentaries, they have an ending point, but lives continue on. I mean, this is the prime example of one where I think if you were to continue rolling this documentary tape, maybe 2, 3, 4 months forward, you would get so much more. And I think that's the sad part of it, but that's also what's so haunting about this documentary is that it's already so harrowing and so heart wrenching, and then it ends, and then you realize that what was coming later is even more terrifying and tragic and terrible. And it just goes to show that some issues just never end, and you have to find a closing point to your documentary, but that does not close the argument, that does not close what is going on in the history, and that history keeps moving forward. And this hopefully aids as a way of persuading people to try to want to put an end to it, because it is so harrowing, and to just know that this all took place before it got even worse, is just very heart wrenching to see. It's one of those documentaries that, regardless of what side you're on, you're going to watch it and feel things because it's sad. It's got some hopelessness to it. There's a little bit of hope in it as well, but I think the hopelessness comes from the fact that at the end of the film, you're like, wow, that was a journey, and then you realize, oh, this was before all hell broke loose, and that's kind of what's the worst part about this documentary. But I think in terms of a documentary, it's powerful. I mean, it does its job very, very well, and that's why I think it is emerging as one of the front runners. Now, it hasn't won a lot of industry prizes, probably because it's a difficult subject matter. There are such divided sides on this issue, but again, I think this is something that, regardless of what side you're on, I'll keep saying it, if you watch this film and you see the images going on, I mean, that's something that cannot be, fabricated, cannot be fictionalized. That is stuff that is being captured with your own eyes. Well, not your own eyes, but the filmmaker's own eyes. I mean, a lot of this footage is his own camera, his own phone. And I kind of love documentaries like that get so in deep to it that, you don't have these like big high-tech cameras. It's just a guy in his phone filming things firsthand. There's a sequence where he's quite literally running for his life, and you see the phone or whatever camera he's using shaking alongside it. And that just shows how real this is. This is not edited or fabricated or fictionalized in any sort of way. That even some other documentaries that we'll talk about, there's a lot of good style to them. There's a lot of interesting, reenactments in some cases, not necessarily with these documentaries, but like some of the documentary shorts and stuff. They very clearly, know what subject they're bringing in to talk with, and then they make it, shot nice, and they light the area nice, and they sit them down, they have a conversation. This is not that. This is not that type of documentary where you get all these like talking heads and these individual perspectives sitting down and talking about their thoughts. It is very much living in the moment as if you are a fly on the wall, in a similar way that 20 Days of Mariupol last year was as well, where you're just in the action 100% of the way through. And that can be a very harrowing experience. It can be overwhelming, but I think that is the most effective way to show this conflict still, while it is so raw, because it has been going on forever. But it really does kind of show this rawness and realness and like alert kind of urgency that I think a documentary like this needs. You're not getting a lot of narration. You're not getting a lot of like, guys sitting in front of a camera talking about his thoughts, because he doesn't have time to sit down and talk about his thoughts. He has to kind of just roll with the punches of what's going on around him. And it's very harrowing. So I highly recommend this one. This is probably, not to tip my ranking, but my favorite of the documentaries, just because it is not just talking about an important issue, but it's doing so in a very raw and emotional way that is very engaging, but also very harrowing. Like, I don't think I'll go back to a lot of these documentaries. But another one that actually reminded me of last year's winner, 20 Days in Mariupol, is a documentary called Porcelain War. Now, this one is a little bit more artful. I mean, it has a lot more beautiful cinematography and beautiful artwork, because this is a war picture. It's about the war in Ukraine, but it's focused on these artists who are trying to kind of get through it through their art. And I think I really love what the message of this film had to say, and the fact that like it's all about these artists trying to use their art as a means of escape and as a means of kind of, finding community and finding grace and finding beauty in something so tragic and so terrible. And I think this is a really interesting companion piece with something like 20 Days of Mariupol, which puts you right in the action, right in the destruction. This one has a lot of destruction, a lot of terrible stuff going on, but there's a beauty as well. There's like something to hold on to, some sort of hope. And this really celebrates the Ukrainian culture in a really positive way too. I just love the way things were animated. There's a lot of sequences where like you'll have this porcelain figure or something, and then you have this animation on top of it with all these beautiful colors. And, this is a great film that spreads an urgent message, but also has something something artful with its cinematography and with its design and with the way it's presented, and also as a hopeful message in the fact that we as artists can still make things that relate to the times we're in and help us get through the times we're in, help us cope with them, help us, make a message of what is going on, but also art preservation and trying to make sure that those beautiful things that we create make it through the tough times we are experiencing. And I think back to something as basic as like film preservation, which is something I'm very a big advocate for with like physical media. I got my VHS tapes literally off camera right here. And that whole idea of, making sure we preserve art and make sure we have something tangible. And when war strikes, I just thought of, the fires in LA, which is obviously a very big difference between the war in Ukraine and fires in LA, but it is the same idea of like so many memories lost, in an instant. And that's the same thing that I think this documentary is getting at, in a way, is the fact that like all this beautiful art can be taken away, especially porcelain war. Porcelain, the fact that it's so fragile, the fact that it can just split into a bunch of shards. I think that is also part of the documentary as well, is advocating for art and art preservation and trying to preserve some sort of humanity in the darkness. And now, as for a documentary, I think obviously, like I said, it's beautifully structured, beautifully crafted. It is a little slow at points, and at some times, it wasn't necessarily engaging me all the way through, but I could still enjoy what it was doing artfully with its cinematography, with its design, as I said, its animation, and I do think it also has just a very important message. So that's Porcelain War. Another one, which is kind of all about its style, which is Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. Now, this one also has a message as well. This kind of chronicles this period of history during the Cold War, leading up to a Congolese leader, Patrice Lumumba, who is assassinated, and this kind of protest that arises over their death. And you start to see also the jazz scene at the time and the influence of jazz musicians at the time of this like 1960s African landscape. And I thought this was very fascinating because it's all facts. There's not a lot of opinion really thrown into it. It's just kind of giving you the cold hard facts and letting you kind of formulate your own attitudes and opinions around it. But I thought how they used all the archival footage and how they used all the objective pieces of the puzzle were really, really fascinating. This is a documentary that is solely successful in its editing. Like, I feel like the editing is what makes or breaks this film, because otherwise it's just kind of a Wikipedia article. You can go down and read all these fun facts, and you can click on someone's name, and then a list of 20 more fun facts come about, and then you click another name, and then you go into another deeper rabbit hole of names and facts and time periods and different events, because it is such a dense period of history and such a dense art form, jazz. And like jazz, I feel like this film just kind of keeps riffing off of itself, and I really like that about it. I think that really makes for a very inviting and very unconventional structure, the way you could just be on one thing and then all of a sudden you throw it over to the percussion just starts playing, and then you throw it over to saxophone and trumpet, and every time you kind of throw it over to the next thing, it becomes a whole different story altogether, but it still has to synchronize and be in harmony with all the other parts to create this bigger whole, being this period of history that it's trying to convey, and this overall kind of streamlined narrative about this assassination, this protest, and the Black experience, the African experience of this time. It deals with a lot, and I think it's one of those films that I cannot get on first viewing all that it's trying to say, all that it's trying to offer, especially because it is just facts, but it's done in such an artful way that I enjoyed watching it. I sat back, I relaxed. It's almost 3 hours long, but I never really felt the length, and even if I felt the length, I was submerged in it. I was never bored by it, and I felt like it really just had a great pacing to it. That being said, the issues themselves, the other films, because you're getting to hear firsthand from the people who were there and who are experiencing it, like in no other land, you have a guy who's quite literally watching his village crumble around him. Porcelain War, it's all these fighters who had to go fight in Ukraine for their country, and the artists who are making the art at the time. Black Box Diaries, it's a firsthand perspective of her case, whereas this one, it's all archival, it's all old clips, so you're not necessarily getting that firsthand experience. You're getting some interviews, obviously, because that's the actual objective clips they're able to pull, but it's just a little different in that sense. But I think it's all the more effective because it is a great piece of art, and it does kind of use the documentary medium in a very fascinating way. So that is that Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, one I definitely recommend if you're a fan of jazz. Moving on to our final documentary, this is Sugarcane, and all these documentaries I've kind of liked. I kind of undersold the category beforehand because I was mad about some snubs, and then I started talking about them, and I actually kind of like these documentaries a lot. This is the one exception. This is the one where I felt like I just don't really connect to this film as a film. And I'll make sense of that statement in just a little bit because, again, this issue is very important. This film follows this investigation into these Canadian Native American Indigenous schools where, these Indigenous kids were sent off and a lot of them didn't survive. And there were a lot of really tragic things happening behind the scenes. It's almost like Nickel Boys in a way. If you've seen that film, the subjects of that film, it kind of teeters into similar territory, but this time kind of involving the indigenous community more so than the black community in that film. But yeah, it kind of dives into the things that are heard, the things that are unheard, and the survivors of that experience and the reflection of those who knew what was going on but couldn't put an end to it, couldn't put a stop to it, and those who actually survived the horrible things that were going on. And these very interesting school systems that aren't really talked about a lot in the news, probably because it's dealing with indigenous people whose lives and whose voices are not normally heard in cinema, period. I mean, look at Killers of the Flower Moon. The whole point of the film was to say that, hey, these stories aren't being told well enough. And I, as a white man, Martin Scorsese, should not be the one to tell it, but I'm going to tell it because someone needs to tell it to get you all aware of what's going on so then indigenous people can tell their own story. And this is kind of what that is. That's indigenous people telling their own story, which is so important. And that's where I want to say, like, the issues and the actual topics and the actual lives at the center of this film are important. And that's why I don't want to slight what is going on, thematically or subject wise in this documentary. The problem is, I think the documentary itself is just, I don't know. I don't think a feature film can fully do this subject matter justice because a lot of this film is about how there is no justice. There's so much that is unknown. There's not a way for them to get their justice in a way. It's all about these longings and thoughts and these moments of reflection. And there's beautiful moments of reflection in this film. But when every few minutes you just get these long pauses where these characters are just kind of staring into space and reflecting and kind of just, letting themselves exist in the moment, in the space. It's a beautiful sentiment, but it's something that doesn't really cater itself well to a feature film. I found myself pretty disengaged and pretty bored through a lot of it, which is really a shame because I think it's photographed beautifully. I think the actual cinematography is probably the best of all five of these documentaries in terms of the visuals. But I also felt like this was, pacing wise and editing wise, one of the most lethargic. And I think it's a disservice to these people. But also, I understand that, like, because there's so many things left unknown, so many things left unresolved, the film feels that way as well. It feels empty in a sense, which is a good device. And I honestly think it could have worked if maybe this was a short film, if this were one of the documentary shorts. But because it's filling a whole feature length film runtime, I just felt like the themes themselves didn't cater to the long form narrative filmmaking, especially in context and around the other films in its category. I mean, I think a lot of the other films really utilize their time so well and have stories that could continue long beyond the credits rolling. Whereas here, the credits rolled, and I feel like I didn't get a ton of new information from scene to scene to justify the runtime, which is really a shame because, like I said, the actual issues and the actual subjects of this documentary are so important, and that's why it's important to acknowledge the difference between filmmaking and the subject it is portraying, because I think those things are so different. And sometimes they can both be great. Like, I can really be an advocate for, supporting the war, supporting the people in Ukraine who are fighting for their lives, and supporting Ukraine, but also understanding that it is an artful piece of documentary filmmaking with Porcelain War. But here, it's like I can acknowledge that these people are stories we're telling, and this is a very important issue to address. But I don't know if the film is addressing it in the most interesting way or the most engaging way. So that is Sugarcane, kind of leaving on a little bit of a low. But also, it could just be my sadness and the fact that some of my favorite documentaries didn't make this category. But overall, pretty strong category. I'm gonna actually rank them right now. I usually wait till the very end of the video to rank, but since we just talked about all of them in conjugation, let's rank these ones. At number one, I probably not any surprise, it's No Other Land. This is just the one that I think was the full package. But then I'm gonna put Porcelain War. I actually thought this was a really engaging one. I thought it had a lot of interesting things to say. And then I'll go soundtrack to a coup d'etat. While it was a lot of information overload, it was also done in such a fascinating, artful way, and some facts and such stories that I just didn't know, and I felt like I learned a lot from it. I could see this being played in classrooms, in both jazz classes and history classes from now on. I'll put Black Box Diaries in number 4. Again, I think the subject is far more interesting than the film around her. Same as Sugarcane, I think the subject is far more interesting than the film around it. But otherwise, Like, I didn't hate these films by any means. I honestly think after talking about them, I like them a little bit more than I did before. But let's move on now to the international films because I'll just tell you, two of them we've already talked about, Amelia Perez and I'm Still Here, so we don't have to continue. But one of them we'll be talking about is The Girl with the Needle from Denmark. This is one that I actually just finished this morning. And this is a reason why this video took a little long to come out because I didn't want to watch this one because I've heard such dark and sinister things about it. I didn't even hear what it was about. I just heard it's gonna make you upset, it's gonna piss you off, and it's gonna make you angry. And I was like, well, I don't necessarily know if I want to watch that. But then I watched all these documentaries that pissed me off and made me angry. So I was like, you know what? Okay, I will give it a try. And I watched it, and yeah, it pissed me off and made me angry. It's so bleak, so grim, so dark. I couldn't even tell you the premise of it because I think it would spoil something. Because I really do think a lot of the emotional catharsis in this film is from allowing yourself to be surprised and swept up by things, especially the very final surprise. If you know what I'm talking about, you can kind of pick up what I'm putting down. But the very last shot, like after the visuals are all wrapped up, right before the credits, there's something that flashes on the screen that I went, what? It's one of those films that just that little brief little frame at the end, I was like, whoa, okay, I need a bath. Like I'm just like so just tense after watching that. But it's not like a thriller. It doesn't really like keep you on the edge of your seat necessarily. It's more of like just this kind of bleak, dreary, sad, 2 hours, but it's not slow. It doesn't never feel slow. I was never checking my watch. It's a very interesting film that I never want to watch again, but I will never forget. But I also would not recommend because I don't know who the audience is for this. I think if the audience for it is anyone, it's probably someone who loves cinematography because I think it's beautifully shot. I think the actual compositions and the framing and everything is so gorgeous and beautiful. Where I'm looking back at these cinematography nominations, and this is probably better than at least three of them. But I really thought this was a successful film. I thought this was very, very good. It's just not something I would recommend. It's not something I enjoyed watching, but it is something that takes some dark, dark swings. And honestly, the whole time I was like, why would a filmmaker conceive this? Like, what has to go on in someone's mind and brain to think of something like this? And then that very last shot, I'm like, oh, okay. So that is The Girl with the Needle, nominated for Best International Film. Another film that's nominated for Best International Film is one that I love so much. I've been championing it since I saw it at New York Film Fest, and that is The Seed of the Sacred Fig. It tells the story of these two daughters, their mother and father. The father has just actually been appointed to a government position where he is deeply involved with the Iranian government, which the two daughters are in protest of. And then the mom is kind of this bystander who doesn't know what to do. Well, does she support her husband? Does she support her daughters? But she kind of tries to keep the family intact, and they have a friend who is brutally hurt through these protests. And the first act kind of plays out as this just kind of look into the political landscape of Iran and all of the hardships that these people face. But then it kind of becomes a domestic thriller. It kind of brings you deeper and deeper into this family unit as you start to see this distrust between the father and the rest of his family, the women in his family. You start to see that distrust kind of come to a head, and you start to see the clash start to happen, and how even the people you love the most, the people that you are supposed to love the most, the people that you spend your whole life working for, can also be those who have the least amount of trust in you, and then how you can lose trust in your family, and how what the political climate of the time is can start to seep its way into your own family dynamics. It's something that's very harrowing, very haunting. But what I love about this film is that most thrillers, they just dive right into the action, and you feel like you need a little bit more time with the characters. And some political pieces spend so much time with the characters that when it gets to the thrills, it's like, all right, the thrills feel short-lived. Whereas here, it's such a perfect blend where you get so much great character work early on. So when the thriller stuff happens, you are so fully invested in these characters and their stakes and their stories that you are so on board with the thrills of it all. But the thrills don't feel random. They don't feel out of place. They feel natural to what the action has been building up towards and what the bubbling kind of pressure cooker nature of the story has been building to. And I really, really like that about this film. The director, Mohammad Rasulov, had to literally go into hiding after making this film. He had to send all his footage in Persian dialogue to Germany to get it edited by a guy who did not speak Persian. And I think that's just the feat of filmmaking. It shows that film is not just a creative outlet, but one that has a very vital, important message to send, and that it takes a team. It really takes a village to make something. Yes, you can have one guy filming something on his iPhone, edits it himself, and puts it out there, and that's cinema, sure. But I think just the collaborative nature of this film being something that was passed around to get this message out, even if it had to be done underground, even if it had to be passed along. Here's a film reel of a language you don't speak, edit it, good luck. But I think that really just speaks to the power of cinema and the power of collaboration and teamwork in a film that is very much about that. These women have to kind of team together against their own father, which is sad. It's kind of like The Shining in that way, where they are defenseless against their own beloved patriarch in their family. But you start to see how the government could just corrupt anyone, even the ones that you hold dearest and nearest to you, and you start to see how priorities lie in a very blunt and tragic fashion. And I thought that's what was so powerful about this film. I've been championing it since New York Film Festival. It's almost 3 hours long, and I was sitting in my seat like, oh gosh, this movie's about to start at like 9 o'clock, and I'm gonna get out of here at midnight. I'm gonna be exhausted, and I was just so emotionally and just energetically excited by the end of this film that I was just ready to just go recommending it to people. Like, I think I stayed up till 3 or 4 a.m. that night because I just couldn't sleep, because I was thinking about this film. I was just living in this film's best moments and trying to like recall them in my brain and be like, wow, like they really took those big swings. And I love films that take big swings, have important things to say, but also just offer great dramatic tension, great character work, great character dynamics, great performances. This film has it all for me. So the fact that this is not a shoe-in to win is quite surprising for me, but it is up against some great films. The last film I'll be talking about in international, because as I said, we did talk about the other two films in this category already, is a film that's also up for animated, which is why I wanted to do it now, because we could kind of cross the bridge to the animated films. And that is Flow, a Latvian film about this little kitty cat whose home is flooded and he's forced to flee. And he meets up with a bunch of other cute little animals along the way. There's a lab, there's a capybara, I think it is. There's all these great little animals. It's all their little adventure. It's almost like a homeward bound type thing. But the uniqueness of this film is that two things. One, it is completely dialogueless. So it's not like your traditional animated film where all the animals speak. I think that adds a layer of rawness and realness to this film, where it almost feels like you're watching something in real life, even though it is animated. But the other niche and the other nuance of this film is that it is animated. So it's able to have these really big, elaborate, beautiful compositions with its animated storytelling. The only thing is that I don't know if it was because I didn't see it at a theater. I watched it on demand, on video on demand, and I watched it, and something about the rendering of the visuals, I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't the biggest fan of the animation style. It's not necessarily 2D. It is 2D, but it's not fully 3D. It's like somewhere in the middle. It almost kind of feels, I don't really even know the way to describe it, but some of the rendering of the visuals, and there were some forest sequences where I thought it was a little too dominated by browns and grays. I don't know. I didn't love the animation in this thing. And I've talked to a lot of people about it, and a lot of people have been like, wait, you didn't like the animation in Flow? It was beautiful. So I'm really wondering if maybe it was just a poorly rendered, version I watched on demand. Maybe I did need to see this in a theater. Maybe I just need to watch it with better lighting circumstances in my house. Maybe I just need to rewatch it, period, and just kind of get accustomed to its animation. Because for me, the animation was the thing that was holding it back a little bit, and not necessarily the actual compositions of the frame. Like, I loved the way it played with the cinematography, if you will, because yes, animated films have cinematography, but I loved how the film had different angles and different shots and different use of perspective, and making this cat feel so small in this big world, which also is a very big emotional investment for the audience, because you want to be invested in this character. When a character can't speak, you need to rely on the visual language to really make you connect and empathize with this character. And I think from the get-go, you just cared so much about this little kitty. I think even if for those people who are cat haters, I know I have some of you watching this channel, and like, I welcome everyone in this channel, but it's harder for you guys. But if you are a cat hater, I think this is going to make you still endeared toward that main character in the very first few minutes, because of the way it's animated, in terms of its blocking, in terms of the choreography, in terms of the interactions between characters. I just didn't love all the colors. I didn't love the drawing of it particularly, but I do think this is one I want to revisit, because I think that one element, if that's the thing holding me back, then that is a good thing, because it means that everything is substance wise, in terms of its text, in terms of its themes, in terms of its emotion, its character work, its interaction, its sound, all of that was firing on all cylinders. So if the only thing I have to overcome is the animation itself, maybe it's just not the animation style I was expecting for a film like this, maybe I just need to better just let my brain kind of engage with it, then I think I'm gonna really, really love this on rewatch, and I do really like it already. But that Flow is nominated for International Feature Film and Animated Film. As for what else is nominated for animated, we've already talked about Wild Robot on here, but another one that I've talked about on the channel, but not for the Death Race, is Inside Out 2. This is one that I was not surprised to see get the nomination, especially because production-wise, like, they did gross so much money. Like, this kind of saved Disney at the box office. So I'm grateful for that, because it kept the theater market going and thriving. But it is a little odd that the sequel did, because I think this is a sequel that kind of just treads everything from the first film, and not in a demeaning way that I say that, but it is, kind of following the same exact template. These emotions, they have a struggle to coexist. The main character doesn't know how to handle these emotions, and then at the end, the emotions learn how to work together. They have to learn how to work in harmony. And I think, just adding anxiety to the mix obviously makes it more relevant to people who are a little older, because as you get older, you start to experience these other emotions like anxiety and ennui and embarrassment and envy. So I thought it was very interesting. I also think, just hearing that the filmmakers wanted to really dive into making it a film that was kind of directly having a conversation with queerness. I think the queer themes are very evident in the film, but it is also very evident that they tried to brush those under the rug, which was a little disheartening. I like how they, at least tried to hint at it to kind of give it a little bit more substance. And I think that's where it would have set itself a little bit apart from the first one, because I think the first one, it's the anxieties of moving. And yes, anxiety is not an emotion in the first one. It's more sadness and fear and anger and disgust and joy. Obviously, those are the main characters. But here, it kind of directly conquers anxiety. But I think it would have been even more effective had it explored in a more direct sense her queerness and Riley's character and her evolution. But again, like, that's a nitpick where I feel like if you don't know the behind the scenes of, Pixar, wanting to have this element of the story and then not being able to tell that element of the story, I don't think it's as big a flaw. And honestly, I didn't love this film even before I knew that. So I think it's just because I had seen this whole thing before. And yes, the animation's great. These characters are great. I love the character interactions. So I think a lot of the charm is in those vocal performances and those characters. But for me, it didn't do enough to set itself apart from the first one. And the first one itself, I already have a few issues with, only because it also feels like, for a film that is so about being one with your emotions, it also feels a little bit distant because of it, because it just seems like these emotions are merely these puppet masters trying to puppet this kind of lifeless thing that is being controlled. It's kind of this existential thing that I can't get over with these films, which actually I think this film improved upon a little bit, in the fact that, like, Riley had her own sense of self in this film, because that's what I was kind of missing from the first film. But even then, it's not fully explored, fully fleshed out. It almost feels like they have so many different ideas of things they can do with this film, but they don't know how to, like, kind of make them all fit within the same puzzle as one another and let them all breathe. It feels like, oh, we got a great idea. Oh, we got another great idea. We got another great idea. It's like really fast stream of consciousness, which I kind of wanted this film to just kind of like ease it a little bit, just like ease into every new plot development, really try to make this world building work with one another, really focus on these new characters, try to find something new to say with the coexistence of emotions, which I didn't find it did. But it's okay, because a lot of people love it, a lot of bright colors, a lot of fun sequences, funny sequences. But kind of the opposite of bright colors, we got Memoir of a Snail, which is all bleak. It's the bleakest of these nominees. But what I really like about Memoir of a Snail, it is a memoir, so it's just this woman kind of chronicling her history and her story. But because it's animated, there's a little bit more of a nuance to it. These are animated characters, so they're a little bit more emotive, a little bit more expressive. When characters lose their fingers, you're quite literally able to chop off the clay on the claymation, or whatever wherever it may be, for those characters. You're able to actually take those big, bold swings. You're able to have bigger, larger set pieces, bigger, larger faces, and ranges of emotions and humor and gags and all that stuff. But what I really like about this film is that it is, animated, and you expect an animated film to be something that's for kids, that's a little bit lighter, that's a little bit more family friendly. But I like how this one deals with really mature subject matter, but isn't just like, okay, we have an R rating, let's go dirty with it. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like it's just telling a really raw, authentic story. It just happens to be animated, and I really, really like that. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be edgy because it's animated, but it also doesn't feel like because it's animated it has to hold back either from being darker and being honest and being truthful to these real experiences. I think Sarah Snook is fantastic, gives my favorite voice performance of the year. I think Jackie Weaver is even almost as fantastic as Sarah Snook is in this film as well. I thought this was really great, especially what it had to say about siblings and kind of that unconventional bond. The fact that this is so rooted in the sibling relationship of wanting to get back together with the siblings, and then the tragedy that strikes them both. I just thought this was really, really powerful and really profound, really beautiful, so well animated, and one that I will just keep thinking about because it offers a really nice palate cleanser to all this very colorful, candy-like animation this year. You have a DreamWorks film, you have a Pixar film, you have an Aardman film, but you also have this really dark, bleak Australian drama that just also happens to be animated. So I thought this was a really beautiful film. But lastly, the last film we're talking about today is two of my favorite guys, Wallace and Gromit. They're back again for Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul. I think this film deals probably less with their relationship than it ever has before. I feel like we've kind of covered all we need to cover with Wallace and Gromit and their relationship themselves. Now we're able to branch out into newer themes like technology taking over and the existential threat of the internet and things that are unknown to us. I mean, it was jokingly kind of compared to Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, probably because it has this really big train set piece at the end. But I think it's even more of a direct comparison in the fact that it's also reckoning with this unknown of AI and this fear of the robots taking over. And I honestly thought that was a really interesting kind of pivot for Wallace and Gromit, which is, all this handmade claymation, really down to earth British comedy, but the last two films, I mean, the last one, it went into a Were Rabbit. It was a horror kind of comment on monster horror movies, even though it wasn't a horror film, obviously. But this one, it's all about robots and technology. Like, I like how Wallace and Gromit is trying to break its own conventions to fit different themes and kind of make them more topical to the time. The only thing is, I did miss the fact that Wallace and Gromit, the core of that friendship and relationship, is usually what is so investing about all these. And this one seemed more interested in the actual plot machinations. Even Wallace and Gromit Were Rabbit, they had a lot of great plot swings, narrative things going on, but it still felt like it all stemmed from this core theme of friendship and camaraderie between Wallace and Gromit. And then at the end of this film, they try to make it about that, where they're like having this big moment of Wallace and Gromit, this big emotional moment that just for this film didn't feel like it made sense with what came before it. But if you are a fan of Wallace and Gromit, if you watch every single one of their shorts, every single one of their films, then this moment feels like a great capper, especially knowing that the actor who played Wallace all those years did pass away. So this is a new voice actor. There's also that meta text and subject matter there that you can kind of bring to the material yourself. But I did kind of chuckle a little bit about how they did make it at the very end. Oh yeah, this is a Wallace and Gromit story, and we're gonna give you this big emotional moment with the two of them, two best friends. But I liked it. I mean, I like these guys. I love their adventures. I think the animation is great. I think Feathers McGraw is a great villain, a great character, so much great humor. The humor is very simple, which I really appreciated. The gnome character is annoying, but I think it's supposed to be. I didn't think this was the peak of Wallace and Gromit, though. I think they've had much better adventures. I think honestly, this one could have been a short as well, like I said with some of the documentaries. I just feel like for a whole feature length film, there was times where I was like, all right, where are we going with this? Let's wrap it up. But it is short. It is still short. It is not a short, but it is shorter than the other nominees. So I definitely think they understood when it was time to kind of put the pen down and say, all right, let's wrap it up. But like I said, a lot of Dead Reckoning comparisons, obviously because of the train sequence at the end, which is also very good. Listen, if you like these guys, you're gonna love this film, and I like this film. So good job, Nick Park. It was great. What can I say? But let us rank now the international features and the animated features. International features at the top is going to be The Seed of the Sacred Fig. That should be no surprise if you know me. Number two, though, we're going to go I'm Still Here. I think I'm Still Here. I talked about it in my video earlier for my Above the Line categories. I think there's a reason it's stuck in a Best Picture. It's one that when you watch it, it really wins you over. Then I'll put Flo. I thought Flo was just so cute, so sweet. I love the animals. For Girl with the Needle, this is not really a mark of quality, more so a mark of what is my favorite and least favorite, because I couldn't say this is my favorite. I didn't enjoy my watching of it, but it is a very well done film. And then 5, Amelia Perez, still not terrible. I think it has its issues. Obviously, I don't think it belongs to this category, but it's not the worst nominee of all 50 of these. I think there are some that are a little bit worse. But moving on to animated feature, let's look at this. I will say number one is probably still going to be The Wild Robot. It won my Pickle Award. It's just the one that I think did the best narratively and animation-wise in terms of blending those all together. But number two, so close, which is Memoir of a Snail. I think that was just such a close runner-up. And then number three, we'll put Flo there as well. It's number three for international. It's number three animated here. And then we'll put Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. Probably my least favorite Wallace and Gromit thing so far, but still a very good one. And then lastly, Inside Out 2. I just have talked about how I'm not the biggest fan of this film, and I've tried so hard to crack it, but I still have not been able to get on the same wavelength as everyone else. But there you go. Those are the animated, documentary, and international features. Let's cross them all off the list. Boom, boom, boom. There they are. They went one at a time. I love that. I went documentary first, then international, then animated. So now we've only got 15 films left on our list, all the 15 short films. That's so exciting. I've already seen the 5 documentary shorts. I'm going to watch the animated and live action shorts tonight. So I'm very excited to finally wrap up this race. And then I'll tell you right now, Friday, tomorrow, I'm going to be giving you my video for those short films. So they're going to be coming. We're going to finish the race tomorrow. It's going to be very exciting. If you've been participating in the death race or you've just been following along, let me know in the comments what your progress is, how many nominees you've seen, and how you would rank these categories, because I think I'm a little controversial in some areas. I think I like Inside Out 2 a lot less less than some people. I think I like Seat of the Sacred Fig a lot more than some people. So let me know in the comments below where we differ, but where we also align. And let me know who you're rooting for in these three categories come Oscar night. And stay tuned because we still got 3 more categories to go tomorrow. And then my final Oscar predictions on Saturday. And then the Oscars on Sunday. And picture this next week. It's going to be a very packed few days here. But I'm very excited. And as always, check me out on Letterboxd. Check me out on Twitter. I'll be logging all the films I see. Hopefully getting to reviewing all the films I see on Letterboxd. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.